The train rattled into Wellsford station, a skeletal silhouette against the inky sky. A single yellow bulb flickered overhead, casting an anemic glow on the deserted platform. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and acrid. It sent a shiver down my spine, a prickle of unease that had been building ever since I'd received the telegram. Urgent. Come to Wellsford immediately. Details upon arrival. Aunt Beatrice. Aunt Beatrice, my only remaining relative, a woman as stiff and proper as the starched collar she always wore, living in a forgotten corner of England I hadn't even known existed. It had all felt terribly out of place. But here I was, Amelia Edwards, stepping onto the cracked pavement of Wellsford with a duffel bag and a heart full of apprehension. The station was deserted, not a single soul in sight, only the mournful creak of the departing train echoing in the stillness. I pulled my coat tighter against the biting wind and squinted at the faded map Aunt Beatrice had enclosed with the telegram. It looked like a child's drawing, a network of squiggly lines with barely legible names scrawled across them. Nowhere on it did I see anything resembling a taxi rank. With a sigh, I shouldered my bag and set off into the night. The town stretched before me, a labyrinth of cobbled streets and tightly packed houses. The buildings were all two-story affairs, their upper floors shrouded in darkness, windows like vacant eyes. The few street lamps that flickered offered scant illumination, casting long, distorted shadows that danced at the edges of my vision. A sense of claustrophobia began to creep in. The houses seemed to lean inwards, their slate roofs forming a continuous, oppressive canopy. The silence was broken only by the rasping of my own breath and the occasional clang of a loose shutter whining in the wind. I began to regret leaving the relative comfort of the train. As I walked, I noticed the names on the peeling house signs. Hawthorne Cottage, Elmwood House, Nightingale Lane, all imbued with a faded pastoral charm. But the reality was far less idyllic. Paint peeled in flaky strips from the walls, revealing the neglected brickwork beneath. Cracked window panes gaped like empty sockets, and stray bits of rubbish littered the cobblestones. The entire town seemed to be slowly sinking into ruin. A sudden gust of wind whipped around a corner, carrying with it the sound of something skittering across the pavement. I jumped, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. When I cautiously peered into the shadows, all I saw was a scrawny alley cat with fur the color of smoke, its eyes gleaming with an otherworldly malice in the dim light. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves, they seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Disjointed phrases impossible to decipher, spoken in a language that chilled me to the bone. I quickened my pace, the whispers becoming a cacophony behind me, urging me on with an unseen force. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I found myself on a slightly wider street, a single lamppost casting a pool of light in its center. In the flickering glow, I saw a sign above a crooked doorway, the Old Crow Inn. It was the only building with any semblance of life, a faint orange glow emanating from a window on the upper floor. Desperate for human contact, for any normalcy in this unsettling town, I hurried towards it. The door creaked open with a rusty groan, and a wave of stale beer and something else, something deeper and more rotten, washed over me. A single man sat hunched over a steaming mug at the bar, his back to me. He didn't turn as I entered, didn't even acknowledge my presence. Clearing my throat, I ventured, "Excuse me? I'm looking for my Aunt Beatrice Edwards. Do you know where she might be?" The figure remained still. Then, in a raspy voice that seemed to originate from the depths of a grave, he spoke. "Beatrice? Old Beatrice? Aye, I knew her. Lived a few streets back, didn't she? Big house with the overgrown garden?" He finally turned, his face a web of wrinkles etched beneath a shock of white hair. But what truly terrified me were his eyes, two milky orbs that seemed to peer into my very soul. "Yes, that's the one." My voice trembled slightly, the unsettling atmosphere of the pub tightening its grip on me. "Do you know if she's all right?" The telegram was rather vague. The old man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Vague, was it? That's Beatrice for you. Always one for theatrics. Doubt she's much worse for wear. Just a bit... touched in the head, you see. My stomach clenched. Touched in the head. What did that even mean? Before I could press him further, the door creaked open again, and a young woman hurried in, her face flushed and her hair windblown. She scanned the room, relief flooding her features when she spotted the old man. "Mr. Harris, thank goodness you're here. It's gotten worse, much worse." Her voice was laced with panic. Mr. Harris grunted, downing the rest of his drink in one long gulp. "Always something, ain't there, Sarah? All right, lead the way then. But mind you," he added, turning to me with a sly glint in his eye, "this ain't a sight for the faint of heart." Intrigued despite myself, I found myself following them out into the night. Sarah, the young woman, explained that she was the caretaker for Miss Beatrice's house, a rambling Victorian affair that loomed at the end of a deserted street. The whispers, she said, had gotten louder, bolder, emanating from the very walls themselves. As we approached the house, a low guttural moan seemed to rise from the ground, vibrating through the soles of my feet. The windows on the upper floor glowed with an eerie, flickering light. Sarah fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking. Finally, the lock clicked open, and with a deep breath, she pushed the door open. A wave of icy air hit me, carrying with it the scent of mildew and decay. The interior of the house was plunged into near darkness, the only light filtering in from the strange glow emanating from upstairs. Sarah lit a lantern, its feeble flame casting grotesque shadows that danced on the dusty walls. The air was thick with the whispers, now a constant, insidious murmur. They seemed to swirl around us, impossible to pinpoint, yet somehow all-encompassing. We ascended the creaking staircase, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. At the top of the stairs, a single door stood ajar, light spilling out from the crack. Sarah hesitated, her face pale. I can't go in there, Miss Amelia. It's not safe." Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself. Whatever awaited me in that room, I had to find Aunt Beatrice. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside. The room was a library, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with leather-bound volumes. In the center, a lone figure sat hunched over a dusty desk, a single flickering candle casting long, distorted shadows across the room. "Aunt Beatrice?" My voice sounded foreign in the stillness. The figure slowly raised its head. My breath hitched in my throat. The woman staring back at me bore a faint resemblance to the stern Aunt Beatrice I remembered from childhood, but her eyes were hollowed and vacant, her face etched with a deep, unsettling sadness. "Amelia?" she rasped, her voice a mere whisper. "You shouldn't have come." Before I could respond, the whispers in the room reached a fever pitch, coalescing into a single, horrifying word. "Leave." The air crackled with unseen energy, the candle flame sputtering and dying. A bookshelf at the far end of the room toppled over with a deafening crash, books scattering across the floor. Panic surged through me, the whispers building into a deafening roar. I stumbled back towards the door, Sarah's terrified scream echoing behind me. Just as I reached for the handle, a spectral figure materialized in the doorway, its form shifting and swirling like smoke. Its eyes, two burning embers, locked onto mine. Terror choked back a scream. I turned and fled, the whispers pursuing me down the creaking stairs, urging me on with an inhuman hunger. I burst through the front door and into the night, not daring to look back. Sarah was gone. The house stood silent, the strange glow from the windows extinguished. I didn't stop running until I found myself back in the deserted town square, gasping for breath, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. The whispers had faded, replaced by the eerie silence of Wellsford, but the memory of that spectral figure and the chilling command to leave gnawed at me. I knew I couldn't just leave, not with Aunt Beatrice trapped in that house with whatever malevolent entity lurked within. Dawn was just beginning to paint the sky with streaks of pink and orange as I stood there, shivering and uncertain. A cold, logical part of me urged me to get on the first train out of Wellsford, to forget about the whispers and the strange happenings in the house. But another, deeper part, a fierce protectiveness for the only family I had left. Wouldn't let me go. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby alleyway. It was Mr. Harris, his face drawn and his eyes filled with a strange urgency. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he rasped. "The thing that haunts this house. It feeds on despair, drives its victims mad." Relief washed over me. At least I wasn't crazy. "Mr. Harris, there has to be a way to help Aunt Beatrice to stop this thing." He nodded grimly. "There might be. A forgotten ritual, passed down through generations in Wellsford. But it's dangerous, Amelia. Dangerous for you and for her." I took a deep breath, the fear a dull ache in my stomach. "I have to try. She's my family." Mr. Harris spent the next few hours poring over ancient tomes by flickering candlelight in the back room of the Old Crow Inn. While he did, I learned the horrifying truth about Wellsford. Centuries ago, the town had been built on a nexus of ley lines, a place of immense power. The whispers were the echo of a banished entity, trapped beneath the town, waiting for the right moment to break free. The ritual he unearthed was a desperate gamble. It required an offering, a piece of myself, to distract the entity while weakening its hold on Aunt Beatrice. It was a near-suicide mission, but it was the only hope I had. As dusk settled over Wellsford once again, I stood outside the house with a pounding heart, a vial of my own blood clutched tightly in my hand. Mr. Harris had explained the steps, his voice gravelly with worry. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but the whispers were growing stronger, a constant reminder of the urgency of the situation. Stepping through the doorway, I was greeted by the same oppressive silence, broken only by the soft glow of a single candle burning in the study. Aunt Beatrice sat in the same chair, her eyes vacant, but she turned towards me as I entered, a flicker of recognition in her gaze. "Amelia?" she croaked, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You shouldn't be here." With a trembling voice, I explained the ritual, the sacrifice necessary to free her. Her eyes widened in horror. "No, Amelia, don't do this for me. It's not worth it." But I was determined. Ignoring her protests, I smashed the vial on the desk, the metallic tang of blood filling the air. A guttural shriek erupted from the floorboards, the house trembling with unseen force. A shadowy figure materialized in the corner, its eyes burning with an unholy hunger. As the entity lunged towards me, I braced myself, ready to face whatever came next. The fate of Wellsford, perhaps even more, hung in the balance.